Hey guys, what's going on? C for another video. So I'm gonna go back at it with another alien abduction story. This is gonna be a Reddit. This isn't gonna be the same story as that were on Scrubby. And with that, let's get on to the video. Okay guys, I'm having a great day. I hope you guys are too. With that, let's get into the video. I was on a wildfire just south of the Dugway, providing grounds in Utah. We were in a fire rig, driving to indecent areas, 4 trucks and closed convoy, when we heard helicopters. 8 black military choppers escorted us in information for like 10 miles. We assumed that they were doing drills and just using it for a fake target practice or something. A little while later, we were parked and about to start hiking to the fire line, where suddenly a thin column of smoke shoots probably about 200 feet in the sky. It was a good mile away from the concussion, was pretty significant. When it hit us, it was like the noise was just ridiculously loud. We thought it was probably no big deal. We knew that there was a strike zone near. A good 5 minutes later, an aircraft like nothing I have ever seen flew right by us, 500 feet, and it was black and sort of rectangular, with the fins well on the other underside. It was pretty slow, and it was like dead silent, so I have to assume it was probably just a stealth glider. It sounded ridiculous, but it immediately reminded me of the huge flying Batmobile Time Burden era. After that, some military personnel got on our radio frequency and instructed us to leave the area immediately. When our crew chief asked who it was and why they signed off, and the incident commander, the guy in the charge managing this entire situation, came on the radio and said we were evacuating the area. They sent us completely different fire about 100 miles to the south and never told us why, except that it was a high priority, which was bull. It was already out when we got there, and we assisted the crew to mop up the operation. The thing that confuses me about this is, why didn't the army want us to see that? Or if it was so dangerous, why didn't they want us to clear it up in the area? Either communication breakdown, or they had a new situation going down and they had to get us out of there without warning. Okay, that was the first story. On to the next one. I was traveling back home with my mom from my auntie's house on the warm, sunny afternoon. While I was sitting in the passenger seat, an object just appeared out of the sky. A little to our left, we both saw it immediately. The size of it was shocking more than anything. It had the classic saucer shape and was shining bright because the sun was reflecting off of it. We continued driving down the road. A few seconds later, just admiring this craft, when all of a sudden, we saw nothing. I still don't believe it to this day. It just vanished, disintegrated, disappeared, whatever you want to call it. I looked back at my mom, and I could tell by her expression she had just seen the same thing. Since this sighting, I've always been interested in UFOs and the possibility of other life in our universe. This object in the sky was definitely not a helicopter, airplanes, or a flock of geese. My mom and I still talk about the sighting we had and can't come up with a reasonable explanation as to what we saw that day. This is my UFO story, and it's not a hoax or fabrication. Everyone always laughs at me when I tell the story, but that's fine. I know what I saw. Okay, that was the second story. On to the next one. Not a very spectacular story, but true. I've always felt some encounter stories were real, but what made me truly believe was one night staying outside the stars. It was late, maybe 2 a.m., and out in the country, in the dark. No street lights, very little to no moon. I was watching what I thought was a satellite move across the sky from from right to left. Didn't think twice about what I saw them. All of a sudden, the satellite just stopped moving and shot off fast. That just totally disappeared in a 45-degree angle from the direction it came. I have never ever seen a satellite change directions ever. It startled me so much I just stood there for a bit wondering if I really saw it or not. I did 100% certain. It's unfortunate no one else was there to see it. Okay, like I've seen a bunch of those stories, and whenever you're out there and you think it's only been like a couple minutes and you see it, like a UFO just standing there, every single story has told me, go home or go run away as soon as you see it. You look at it, take a picture, and go right Okay, I don't want to get probed. I don't want aliens looking at me like that. Okay, I have creepy people that look at me like that all the time. One of them could be my neighbor too. Kicked back on top of the rooftop, one clear summer night in Germany, looking up at the stars, I spot a satellite up there and watching it traverse in the night sky as I usually do. It just looked like a regular little old white dot in the sky, no different from any star, except for it moves in a constant direction, but a constant speed as a satellite tends to, looking at the naked eye from the ground. Suddenly, when it was pretty much directly overhead, this thing turns on a dime and moves in a complete different direction. Then again and again, tracing perfect isosceles triangles patterns. When it moved back to the point it was initially changed from heading from it, it pretty much just keeps moving at a much higher speed and at a slightly different heading than when I first spotted it, until it dips below the horizon. At first I thought it was a surveillance satellite or a weather satellite or whatnot. I told a friend of mine who'd been in the Army intelligence and knows stuff like that. He told me satellites can't manufacture like that, claimed I'd seen a bona fide UFO. This was about 1956 or 1996. Okay, those stories weren't necessarily the best, and here's one that seems a lot better now. I hope you guys enjoy this one. Not my story, but my dad's. As a consequence of not being my story, I can't insist I know what I saw and all that. All I can tell you is that I believed him, and he has no reason to lie to me at all. My dad has dozens of stories like this. He grew up in rural Illinois near a woodsy area. UFO activity was apparently high back then. I don't know if it was just my family or the whole area, but my dad, my grandpa would just sit on the porch, watch lights fly around the house for fun. This was a long time ago, when my dad was a kid. He's about 60 right now. They would watch the stars dart around like lasers and laugh about it. It's just mind-blowing to me. I've only seen that kind of thing happen once or twice, and it kind of freaked me out. Besides that, other weird things would happen to my dad. Some of it pretty similar to stuff described on this thread. Actually isolated earthquakes in Illinois that nobody else felt, bright orbs floating around the sky, following him around, etc. It's been a while since he told me these stories, but one of the particularly weird ones has always stuck with me. FYI, I'm completely aware that this sounds absolutely crazy and that my dad was just messing with me. I prefer to believe that, but I have good reason to trust him. For starters, he's never lied to me about anything. He wasn't the type of person to make stuff up for show. He had absolutely nothing to gain from making this up. He never tried publishing it or even writing it down. He would just talk about it sometimes. Anyway, so my dad was in his teens, and the weird UFO stuff has been happening his whole life at this point. He's out in his driveway for whatever reason, doing whatever people do when they live in the woodsy rural area. His parents aren't home. They're out shopping at work or whatever. Suddenly, this big black car pulls up in his driveway. Tinted windows, completely black. My dad just kind of watches it pull in, not sure what to think. Something to remember here. Not only was this a rural area, but it was 50 years ago. People were a lot more trusting back then. Nowadays, you'd have to be crazy to leave the front door unlocked, but back then it was no big deal. So this strange black car pulls into my dad's driveway. It's making no noise at all, which my dad notices right away. The door opens, and out comes a super tall, fair-faced white man. He has blonde hair, an extremely well-tailored suit, and black sunglasses on the right. My dad could tell that there's something off about him. He looks too perfect. Flawless skin, a childlike smile, and very overdressed for a hot summer day. He looks distinctly out of place. The man walks up to my dad, asks for his name. My dad, around 15 at the time, asks him why he wants to know. The man smiles and explains he just wants to ask him a few questions and he means no harm. Bemused, my dad agrees, but he's still wary of this strange man. First, the tall white dude asks my dad if he lives there. My dad says yes and asks him why he wants to know. The man has a completely relaxed, non-confrontational tone and seems almost giddy-like. He was really excited to have this conversation. His child, overzealous grin hadn't faded in the least. He asked my dad if he'd seen, felt, or heard anything that was outside the ordinary. The man just kept grinning, and by now my dad was feeling pretty comfortable. He had never seen this guy before in his life. He didn't appear to be any kind of government agent, His behavior was far too unusual. Suddenly, the man's demeanor completely changed. His grin disappeared. He looked worried without so much of as a goodbye. He opens his car, gets back inside, drives home, still making no noise at all. A couple minutes later, my dad's parents come back in from the shopping. Now, here's for the really weird part. My mom said that she saw the same dude 30 years later. She was in the bookstore looking to buy some, don't know the details really, when she turned around and noticed this tall looking blonde guy in the black suit at the end of the table in the cafe 30 feet or so away from my mom. He was reading a newspaper. Sitting across from him was another dude dressed exactly the same as the blonde. They still look very strange and out of the place somehow, too perfect, too clean. Now my mom had heard this story from my dad, and she usually recognized my dad's descriptions of a man. He definitely stood out. So he's kind of taken aback, trying to figure out if he's actually the man my dad has seen all those years ago. The blonde guy notices my mom looking at him. Again, his demeanor completely changes. He stands up, turns around, and quickly walks away from the bookstore with a second guy right behind him. What the heck, right? I'm actually freaking out just a little bit thinking about this. I'm 22 and I have to wonder if it's going to run into this little awkward blonde stalker. It's like the MIB sent their most inept agents to follow my dad around. Or the most obvious alien ever is trying to study my family in our natural habitat. I don't know. I know this is a very vague. I'm going to bring this up to my dad tonight and try to clarify a few things. I'll be honest, I've pushed this story out of my head because it weirds me out. Okay guys, time for the final story. This one looks pretty good. It's pretty long. I'm going to end this video on a banger, and with that, let's get into it. Okay, here it goes. The first time I ever saw anything, I was 7 in Houston, Texas. I used to like climbing on top of my mom's suburb on the driveway, stare at the stars. One night, I saw intensely bright floating light over this tree line, probably about a half a mile away. I hollered and nobody came to see it. I did not see anything else until March of 2008. The experience had between the 10th and the 15th, but I can't specifically say the date because I was up for 4 days trying to come up with an explanation to satisfy what I'd seen. This was in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. My mom lived there in the garden home community. All the houses the same size, all one story, and you had a great visibility distance-wise. I walked out at my buddy's house at exactly 4 a.m. to a bright starry night. When I walked out, something came to my eye and left me. I looked over, saw a bright blue, yellow, green, white, red, orange, strobing, flashing light floating silently to the left. I stood in awe at it and did not want to go grab anyone because I didn't want to miss anything. I watched it as it passed in front of the moon, behind of my friends' places, and I saw the outline of a craft. It was a teardrop sunflower seed type shape, and the craft seemed to have the light being transmitted from the top half of it. It was almost as if transmitting some type of light pattern upwards. It was also had a dark, thin, smooth line of exhaust and disappeared 50 to 75 feet between. This all occurred no less than 400 yards away from me. After I passed the moon, I ran inside, grabbed someone he saw, but it was way too far to make out what it was. I went home, which was a few blocks away, and looked out from the driveway, the same direction first craft had come in. 2 dim white lights slowly coming over the horizon, a slow pace heading towards me. I then ran aside and grabbed my mother out of bed. We stood there for about 20 minutes while 5 separated crafts flew over us. First came 2, then the other 2, then 1, about 6 to 7 minutes apart from each other, maybe 20 miles per hour, maybe up to 200 feet up, completely silent. The way that they looked was underneath was each one had 2 huge bright white lights, which were maybe 30 to 40 across each, but they were so bright it was hard to get a good estimate. They also had a pulsating red one between the white lights and dim and relit. I would estimate from the size of a white light that was a craft was maybe between 150 to 200 feet wide. The last craft that flew over us was lower and slower than the first four had. Then it made a noise. It could be let out that to this day it haunts me. What I could best compare it to would be the sound of which would be a screaming bottle rocket, followed immediately after by the sound. That's the best I could find to take those two sounds, except make it digital and multiply it 50. This was allowed. The craft did this twice. These crafts flew directly over us, and I believe that the sound was an acknowledgement. Whoever was piloting it knew that they were watching it. Kind of like a hello. I immediately started crying. I had no idea what I was looking at or had heard. The second big experience that had occurred was a couple weeks later. I was standing in the driveway smoking a cigarette, listening to my iPod. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I decided to pause my iPod to turn on the black light, waved my hand over a couple of times, somewhat of a strobe pattern. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything come up, but I got the watched feeling. I looked up, and directly above me was a trapezoid-shaped craft with round edges that had a dark red and black pulsating, glowing outline. It was like flowing electricity. It was not even 70 feet up. I could maybe hit this thing with a rock. I stood there while hovering directly above me, completely silent, for maybe 10 to 15 seconds, while it made this kind of motion similar to the ball that Luke trained with in Star Wars. It hovers side to side, front to back, into a smooth motion, never getting more than 20 feet away from its original position. It was extremely fascinating, but I was frozen stiff. After those couple seconds, I waved one hand in kind of a friendly manner. It then changed light patterns and hovered away from my house. Upon deeper inspection, the fact that I knew that I saw but made no effort to evade my detection makes me think it wanted to follow me. Although I was so freaked out at the time, I have seen the same craft on 3 different occasions. Once again in Tuckasalona, once in Hoover, and once in Bessemer. I'm sorry guys, I don't know where that is or how to pronounce that. The time I saw it in Hoover was an apartment complex at the top of a huge hill with a great overlook. It was nighttime and I had some friends over to the overlook. I saw a gray craft facing the direction that looked similar to a Hoth fighter. Forgive me, Star Wars references. And as soon as I saw it, it took off to the same right. Extremely silent, extremely quick. The time the Bessemer and Tuckasalona, the trapezoid shape appeared in the sky, solid white, stretched to twice its length, and the bottom shot up to the front, like it hit speedlight or something. I do frequently see what I like to call streaks. They look like shooting stars, only very low, move slower, but they still have a tail that streams behind them. They also could appear in many different colors. One strange story is one night when I had a dream Tuckasalona in a dream. I couldn't see or hear anything, but I could just feel. I was laying on something cold, and I had felt this seam like a rubber in between my legs around my junk. It was a very strange to me, since a lot of people who report abductions have reported abductions of their sperm, eggs, being taken for breeding programs. The next morning, I went to let out the dog in the backyard, which was very small. To the left of the patio, there was a solid white ring in the grass that was maybe 8 to 10 feet wide. I showed my mother, and she had told me that she had heard a noise that woke her up the night before, but she just dismissed it. Another extremely confusing experience I had occurred in my driveway to Tuckasalona. To give you an idea where this occurred, look up Sheldon State Community College. The house was less than a quarter mile from the campus in the Inglewood neighborhood. It was nighttime, and I heard this static that I could compare to a jet. I looked over, and directly above the community college was a light blue slit in the sky. I would say it was maybe 200 yards long, completely vertical, and had looked like an electric current coming out of both sides of it. I looked at it, maybe about 25 white rings 25 white things shot out of the slits, to one left of the time, quickly pacing, leaving the trail behind it. And I previously talked about, after they passed the bottom of the slit, went upwards until the slit closed, and it made a strange sound, and then it was gone. I've also seen a bunch of experiences with orbs, some solid lit that float across the sky or move in strange patterns, and some that brighten up the gray intensely and then fade as they pass. After that first experience, I started doing some research because I was so confused. I didn't understand that I have normally large amount of experience, and I honestly can't tell you why. I wish I could. I found a type of UFO witness called a contactee. These people are similar to abductees, except they are kept up with. I have no idea why I have so many experiences. I only listed a fraction of them. My best guess would that I acknowledge the presence or whatever it would be to see that they kept on looking at me. It was kind of a gift and a curse. There are so many people that I can talk about this with and that they can take it serious. I just want some people to know. I want to go and seek some hypotherapy to see if they might be able to recall something and get me to say something. I'm grateful, but still don't know much about my experience. If y'all can get me out or could share this, that would be great. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Okay guys, that's going to be the whole entire video. I hope you guys enjoyed this one about aliens. I don't know if I'm going to keep posting about aliens. If you guys seem to like it, I might keep posting it. If you guys don't like it, then I'll post something else. With that, I hope you guys have a great day, and watch out from the spaghetti monster.